Welcome to Vermont Artists and Authors, where we interview great storytellers and artists from the amazing Green Mountain State. This is episode 31. I am your host, Barney Smith of StoryComic.com, and we're excited to have with us the highly renowned Vermont author, Judge Dean Pineles. Dean.
Hi, Barney. Nice to be with you.
How you doing?
Doing great.
Excellent. This is So Dean, here we are as of this recording. It is the beginning of September. Nights are kind of getting a little bit cooler, and this is the perfect time of year if somebody wants to settle in and read a good book. They can always pick up Rootstock Publishing, A Judge's Odyssey, which just came out at the end of this past July, correct?
That's correct, July 19th, and it's also available generally. Most bookstores are carrying it. It's available on Amazon, available at Bear Pond Books and Stowe. If anyone's interested, it's pretty easy to get a hold of.
You just did a reading over at Bear Pond Books and Stowe, correct?
Well, I didn't do a reading. I did a signing.
Okay,
that was pretty well attended. That was a couple of weeks ago. That was fun. That was my first book signing. Never done that before. Didn't know what to expect, but it was pretty well received.
How was that? How was that doing a book signing in, kind of like a Vermont tourist town like that?
Well, again, I'd never done this before. This is the first book I've written. The local bookstore was enthusiastic about having me do a signing. So one Saturday, a couple of weeks ago, I set up shop in the store. They had a copy of the book prominently displayed, so anyone coming into the store could look at it and see that I was there to sign copies. And people wandered in. A lot of friends, a lot of people I hadn't seen for a while. It was kind of a get-together event, and actually sold a few books, signed a few books, and it was a lot of fun.
So talk to us a bit about, Dean. This is your memoir. It's a pretty thick book. It's over 250 pages. It's knocking on 270 pages. This is some amazing storied career. It's kind of split up into three parts where you talk about your formative years when you're in the military, and then from there you went on to be a lawyer and a judge here in Vermont, and then you travel overseas and work as a legal expert through the ULEX.
Well, that was when I was in Kosovo. Before
Right.
Kosovo, I did legal and judicial work in Russia, Kazakhstan, and the country of Georgia. ULEX is the acronym that stands for the European Union Rule of Law Mission in Kosovo. EULEX, EU standing for the European Union. Lex, I believe, is the Latin word for law. So that's what that stands for. But ULEX was my employer in Kosovo for 2.5 years.
Right. And so talk to us a bit about that. We get into the career and how you kind of got into law. But a big part of this, a big part of your book is talking about your work over in Kosovo.
Kosovo and Serbia fought a very brutal war back in the late 90s. And it ended when NATO bombed Serbia. And some people might recall the name of Slobodan Milosevic. He was a strong man at the time, and he engaged in what is now called ethnic cleansing. And up to 1 million Kosovars who are Albanian by ethnicity were forced out of the country. But then NATO came in, and the war ended, and all of the Kosovars flooded back to a very different country. The UN then took over control of administering this war-torn country. And as part of their effort to rebuild the legal system, they hired international prosecutors, international investigators, and international judges. And that went on for a number of years until 2008, when Kosovo unilaterally declared independence from Serbia. And ULEX, my employer, followed the same model of hiring international judges and other legal professionals, and I was one of those. And so I would sit on these high profile trials, war crimes, judicial corruption, organ trafficking, and the like. Now, getting back to the language, first of all, there are no juries in this legal system. So cases were heard and decided by professional judges like me who came from all over Europe, the United States, and a couple of other countries. So I would sit on a 3-judge panel with someone who might be from Poland on one side of me and from Latvia on the other side of me. And all of the trials had to be translated into the working languages. So let's say there was a prosecution against a member of the Kosovo Liberation Army who was Albanian and spoke Albanian. And when that person testified in Albanian, it would have to be translated into other languages. Now, interestingly, English was the working language of the European Union. So even though most of the countries in the European Union don't speak English as their primary language, the primary language in Kosovo in the trials was English. So if someone was speaking English, another person was speaking Serbian. In the organ trafficking case I did, there were multiple language. They all had to be translated. Translated maybe once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times, depending upon the composition of the trial. So getting it right was always critical. We would have interpreters sitting side by side who would we would say something in English, or I would say something in English. The translator would translate it into Albanian. If it also had to be translated into Serbian or Russian or Polish, there would be translators there to do that. It became a fairly complicated system, and they had to get it right. If you got the words wrong, then it may change the whole meaning of the particular witness's testimony. So yes, language was critically important.
Right. And you did bring up that good point on there, is like how important language is from a subjective way, and also how much language is important to translate it into more of an objective way, especially when you're dealing with witnesses and the like. Is when you sat on there, because I think you mentioned too, is that you have a 3-judge panel. Now, is it 2 of them are from a different country, but one of them would be someone that would know more about more of the local cultures and laws as well?
Well, the composition varied, but the standard
Okay.
composition of the panel was 2 international judges, like me, and 1 local judge, 1 Kosovo judge. And the reason for that was for us to mentor the local judge in
Okay.
European or American best legal practices. They'd been out of the loop for about a decade. Uh, when Slobodan Milosevic began to clamp down on Kosovo, it was in the late 80s, early 90s. And Serbia basically took over Kosovo, and all the local institutions were crushed, if you will, and replaced with Serbian institutions. So all the lawyers, all the judges, all the school kids, all the professionals had basically a lost decade. And so when the European Union, or when the UN took over, and then the European Union, the local judges were still trying to get up to speed since they basically lost a decade. So
Right.
we would have typically a local judge sitting with us. Most of them knew the local ropes, and that was always handy, but we were supposed to be mentoring them and bringing them up to speed so when the time came, they could take over on their own. And that time has now come.
And so you did this after basically your career of working as a judge in Vermont. Now, what were some of the things that you learned, because you had a career already there? You already had a career before you went. What were some of the things that you were able to take back from your experiences? Was it 28 months
In
over there?
Kosovo. In
Yep.
Kosovo.
what were some of the things that the experiences that you were able to take back when you came back?
Well, talking about the legal system, again,
Right.
Kosovo had no juries, and that was common throughout continental Europe. Juries were just not used for the most part. So I had to learn quickly how to preside on cases where I and the other two judges were the decision makers, rather than having 12 jurors. And what I learned is that I much prefer the jury system. When you have professional judges sitting out there making decisions, my experience tells me that those decisions don't carry quite the same amount of public acceptance as a jury of your peers, if you will. So I came back feeling much more confident about the jury system. I probably presided over 100 jury trials in Vermont, so I knew that system pretty well, and it was quite an experience to sit in another system. It was comparative for me. And my conclusion, after sitting on a lot of cases as a professional judge, a 3-judge panel, my conclusion was I really like the jury system. I mean, it's not perfect, obviously. Jurors make mistakes and the like, but I think juries are much more apt to be accepted by the public. And that's very important in the judicial system, to have the public supporting the decisions that juries make. And I think for the most part in this country, that's true. Not always. I mean, you think of the O.J. Simpson case and some other controversial cases where the jury decision was kind of called into question. But for the most part, in my experience, they really do a good job. They take it seriously. They like the experience. They come away feeling that our justice system is very sound. So that was one of the things I took away from my experience there.
And you also mentioned too in a previous interview that you love being a judge as compared to being an advocate, because you're able to hear both sides of the story. You're able to really dive into the human condition. Um, how would you compare your experiences of being a judge? I mean, besides the jury piece, not necessarily the system, but the people you met, the people that you interacted with, as compared to an American system, as compared to a system that you were in Kosovo?
Well, I had to be a quick learner when I went to Kosovo because, again, the system was quite different. I
Right.
had to learn how to become the decision maker in the trials, along with two people sitting on either side of me, and that was an interesting experience because the people may come from different legal systems. It might be somebody, as I said, from Poland sitting with me on the panel, somebody from Kosovo. Uh, Name your European country, somebody from Germany, somebody from the UK, somebody from the Baltics, somebody from Portugal. I worked with all of those people. So we always had to, first of all, get to understand each other as we speak.
Hmm.
Because even though the language was English, there are a lot of different ways to speak English. And, the accents were different and the intonations were different and the quality of the speech was different. So that was always a challenge. Getting
Hmm.
so the three of us on the bench could understand each other. We also had to come to an understanding of the rules and regulations that we were using in a particular case that might be different from Poland, might be different, certainly different from the U.S. But it was fun. It
Hmm.
was really fun. I made a lot of good friends from different legal systems, different cultures, and so forth. And as the decision makers, after we heard the case, we always had to retire to chambers, so to speak, and then hash it out and try to come to a unanimous decision. And that oftentimes took hours, if not days, in a complicated case. Then we would have to go back on the bench and announce the decision orally to the defendants and their lawyers and the press and the public that happened to be in the courtroom. And we always had to do that very carefully so that people understood what we were deciding and so forth. So a lot of differences, a lot of challenges, but a lot of fun.
It's just interesting when you kind of go in your chambers, as you mentioned. Do you also have like translators in the room there as well, or how did that work?
We would always have translators, yes, and
Yeah.
translators were worth their weight in gold, believe me, because a good translator made our job so much easier. There were times when the translator might not be as fluent in English, again, the working language as you would like, and occasionally I would have to say, well, you didn't quite get that right, so let me elaborate and make sure everyone understands it carefully. So yeah, always had to stay on your toes.
Right. Now, would you for folks that for I would say other judges or advocates or lawyers that might be either at the beginning of their career, the middle of their career, or near the end of their career, what level would you say it's important to go overseas like you did and experience different cultures, legal systems? Has that does it, how important is that for somebody in the legal system?
Well, I had already had a career, as you pointed out,
Right.
in Vermont. I was on the trial bench for 21 years in Vermont before I did any of the overseas work. So I felt I had a lot of experience. I dealt with all kinds of cases: murder, sexual assault, fraud, you name it, up and down the list. So I felt fairly confident in my own abilities. Some of the other judges I worked with, I would say, came from a different system, perhaps didn't have as much experience as I did, perhaps had more experience than I did. The Kosovo judges sometimes found themselves adrift because they were not comfortable, oftentimes sitting with us on the panels, particularly when we were dealing with war crimes.
Hmm.
If a local war hero was one of the defendants for allegedly committing a war crime, the local judges would do just about anything to avoid sitting on that case. Because if we found a war hero guilty
Hmm.
and the local judge was part of that decision making, that local judge could actually find himself or herself in physical danger.
Right.
And so they weren't very keen on sitting on those types of cases.
Now, so talk to us a bit about that. How complicated is it being a judge? How much you have to weigh the technical aspects of it as compared to the cultural aspects of the work you were doing?
Well, culture always sort of was part of the decision, not part of the legal decision, because
Hmm.
we had to follow the rules and the facts. But culturally, many of the cases that came before the court were cases involving people from the Kosovo Liberation Army who fought against the Serbians during the war, and they were considered war heroes. They were revered in Kosovo society. But just because of the reverence, it didn't mean that they didn't commit some serious crimes on their side. And there was no, during the UN days and during the ULEX days, there was no free pass for members of the Kosovo Liberation Army, even though they were considered war heroes. So, in a couple of cases, I heard, their supporters would be packed into the courtroom. We would have to have SWAT teams carrying automatic weapons, making sure that there was no trouble. The war heroes supporters would be packed out on the street during the trials and so forth. So that was kind of a cultural overview of a lot of what we did, and it certainly played into the publicity, uh, and it did have some effect on Me personally, one of the cases, I had to go back and forth to the courthouse in an armored vehicle. I
Hmm.
had to put bomb-proof and bulletproof doors on my apartment. I had to have bars over the windows and so forth. I mean, that was a cultural aspect. That was the overlay of what was taking place in these trials.
Right. Was that the one with Fatimir?
Fatmir
Was it
Limai,
Lima? Yeah.
yeah, he
Yeah.
was the lead defendant. He was a extremely popular war hero, but
Commander Steele, right? Is that?
Commander Steele,
Yeah.
he and 9 co-defendants were alleged to have committed war crimes at a detention center where they mistreated the Serbian prisoners of war. They mistreated the Albanian collaborators. They were alleged to have marched a lot of these prisoners of war to an open field where they were murdered and and buried in a shallow grave. And these were the kinds. And of course, they denied everything. They said, "Hey, wait a minute. We're not war criminals. We're liberators. We liberated this country from Serbia, so
Right.
we shouldn't even be standing here." Uh, but the international prosecutors and investigators would investigate these allegations, and if they thought they had proof beyond a reasonable doubt, they would file an indictment, and away we would go to the trial.
Hmm. Right. And that was the one with you that the witness that ended up getting killed in Germany.
The witness in this particular case was a member of the Kosovo Liberation Army. And at this particular detention center where these prisoners of war were held, he kept a secret diary. I
Hmm.
think he had some moral qualms about the way this was occurring, about the way the prisoners were treated, the way the prisoners were murdered, and he kept a secret diary. And that diary, and this was late '90s, late 1990s, and everything went fine until the mid 2000s when uh, he began to feel some intimidation from people he knew back in the day at the detention center, and he began to believe that people were aware that he had kept the secret diary. So he went to the police, went to the prosecutor. They did a forensic evaluation. His allegations were substantiated. They found the dead bodies in the grave. They found a scythe in the grave that was allegedly used to murder one of the prisoners of war. So there was enough evidence to file an indictment. And at that point in time, he was known to be the key prosecution witness.
Hmm.
And he was placed in the witness protection program because he feared for his life, and I think legitimately so. Uh, but before the trial, 2 weeks before the trial, he was allowed to go to Germany to visit his brother, and he was found hanging dead from a tree in Duisburg, Germany. And it was considered a suicide, but he had been under enormous pressure from the prosecutor to testify in court against these 10 war heroes. And his family was also being intimidated. His wife was absolutely furious at the prosecutor for putting all this pressure on her husband. And he took the easy way out for himself and his family. Rather than
Hmm.
going through the agony of the trial, he committed suicide.
Right.
We then had to decide whether there was enough evidence without his testimony to go forward, and that created another legal circus, so to speak. All the defendants argued vigorously that without him, there was no case. I thought otherwise. I was in a minority on the 3-judge panel. The 2 judges in the majority decided to dismiss the case. I wrote a dissenting opinion. The prosecutor appealed to the Kosovo Supreme Court, and surprisingly, the Supreme Court adopted the reasoning of my dissenting appeal, and the case then proceeded to trial. Uh, so, a lot going on, a lot of complexities.
Right. Now, has that case been resolved, or is that is that still happening right now?
The case, the Supreme Court, in adopted my reasoning, overturned the dismissal of the case and ordered that it be retried. And it was retried before another three-judge panel after I returned to the U.S. And the verdict in that retrial was not guilty.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that was
And
that was the ultimate outcome.
that was fairly recent. That was 2016 or 2017.
It was a couple of years after my case, and the presiding judge in that case was from the UK. I knew him. I had some respect for him. I assumed that he had evaluated the facts and the law appropriately and issued a reasonable decision. As it
Right.
turned out, he ended up being the subject of a scandal in ULEX, which is sort of tangential to my book. I was inclined to include that scandal sort of toward the end of the book.
Hmm.
I then communicated with this judge from the UK, and he gave me all sorts of reasons why it would be unfair to do so. And I didn't. So that's not part of the book, but it's part of ULEX's history. Still
Right.
going on.
Yeah, it is. And what's really interesting is that, as you mentioned to the Balkan Insight, you fairly regularly speaking, you put out articles through here too, right?
Right. Balkan Insight is an online news site that is broadcast throughout the Balkans. And I think since about 2000, and I should say I've followed developments in the Balkans very carefully since I've been
Mm.
back in the US. And I think I've written maybe about a dozen articles that have been published in Balkan Insight and broadcast throughout that part of the world.
And and I think you also put in here like a postscript about what's happening in Ukraine as well, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Because there's a direct line from NATO bombing in Serbia and Kosovo in 1999 to what's going on in Ukraine right now.
Mm. And you call that the Kosovo precedent.
The Kosovo precedent, I can explain it if that would be useful.
Yeah.
Uh, in 1999, NATO intervened to stop the humanitarian crisis, and they bombed Kosovo. They bombed Serbia. They bombed Serbian sites in Kosovo. The war came to an end in 1999, and Russia, being Serbia's ally, was absolutely furious at NATO's
Mm.
intervention, and they basically put down an ultimatum. They said, you know, the West is going to regret doing this. And time went on, and when Kosovo declared independence in 2008, Putin was livid. He
Mm.
said again, uh, you in the West will learn to regret this. This was contrary to international law. This was done unilaterally by NATO, and you're going to regret it. And no one knew then whether this was just hyperbole and rhetoric or whether he was serious. Well, it turned out he was serious because later in 2008, Russia invaded Georgia.
Mm.
I was there at the time, and part of the justification for Russia's intervention in Georgia was the fact that NATO had done the same thing in Kosovo just earlier that year. And then time passed, and in 2014, Russia again invaded Crimea. And in the Crimean Declaration of Independence, the written Declaration of Independence, Crimea actually refers to the fact that something similar had happened in Kosovo. They refer to the Kosovo precedent. And then fast forward to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russia used the same rationale when they declared the independence of two of the Russian-speaking republics in the Donbass region, Luhansk and Donetsk. One of the first things that happened when Russia invaded was to recognize the independence of those two provinces of the Donbass region, again relying on what NATO and the West had done way back in Kosovo. So
So you're not surprised then, probably, about what's happened over the last several months.
well, I'm surprised at the brutality of it,
Hmm.
and I'm surprised at the rationale that Russia has used. It's not only the Kosovo precedent, but it's the so-called denazification of Ukraine, which really doesn't exist.
Hmm.
And the brutality of it, I was very surprised at that, but very impressed at the strength and resilience of the Ukrainians.
Hmm.
I think this war is ultimately going to end up in a stalemate of some sort. Tens of thousands of people are going to be killed. Who knows what the ultimate negotiated settlement will be? But it's been an absolute international disaster.
Right. Right. So talk to us a bit about. Let's talk about the techniques of the book.
Okay.
Now, this is something that you've been working on, as we say, for a lot of years. Uh, Very much, as you say, that the style of this is way different than writing any like legal documents.
Exactly.
So first of all, I want to ask you about how writing a memoir uh, is different for you as compared to writing legal briefs or writing legal articles.
Well, legal briefs, and I've written a lot, and legal articles, I've written a lot. Legal writing takes sort of a standardized format,
Mm.
findings of fact and conclusions of law. And typically it's very dry, may not be the right word, but there aren't a lot of rhetorical flourishes. There's not a lot of flowery language. You're just trying to explain your decision and how you got there based on your findings of fact and your analysis of the law that applies to those facts. It's not meant to be uh, uh, beach reading.
Mm.
It's meant to just convey to the litigants how you arrived at your decision. And it involves a lot of references to prior legal cases. There are a lot of legal citations in it, a lot of uh, legal writing that most people would find useful trying to get to sleep at night. Uh, it's a very different style of writing. It's not
Right.
designed for the average reader. Uh, so I had to get out of my comfort zone. I was very comfortable doing legal writing. I did a lot of it, and I think I was fairly good at it. But when you're writing for a general audience, it's a completely different style of writing, and I
Mm.
had to adjust to that. And I had to look at all the words I was using, my sentence structure, my paragraph structure, and so forth to see if I was conveying what I wanted to convey to just a regular person who wasn't versed in the law. And that took some work. My wife was very helpful in saying, "Look, you've got to say this differently. You have to, include some anecdotes. You have to include different vocabulary," and that took a lot of work. I think my book is readable for the general public. I
Mm.
certainly hope it is. I really worked hard in including a lot of stories, some of which I hope were funny. some of which I hope were interesting that may captivate regular readers' attention and so forth. There is a lot of discussion about legal trials, but even in that respect, I tried to make the discussion readable to the average person who might pick up the book. I don't know if I
So,
succeed, someone other than I will have to tell me whether I've succeeded or not. I hope I have, but
right.
I've been getting fairly positive reviews from non-legal reviewers.
So
So,
talk to us a bit about the the editing process on this. How different is the final product as compared to your first draft?
well, my first draft focused almost exclusively on the international part of
Mm,
my career. And when I submitted that to the publisher, Rootstock Publishing,
mhm,
I got a very favorable uh, response on that part of it. But the publisher said, you really ought to have something that leads into this, something
mm,
that explains who you are and how you got there and so forth. And that sounded reasonable. So I wrote an introduction that was probably 6 pages long, explaining who I was, where I went to school, what I did in the military, and so forth. And the publisher said, look, this is much too short. You really have to talk about your experiences, not only growing up and where you went to school, but as a lawyer and a judge in Vermont. And I said, okay. I took the 6 pages and expanded it to 50 pages. And I submitted the 50 pages to the publisher, and they said, look, we did tell you to elaborate on your Vermont career, but 50 pages is about twice too many. Cut it back to cut it back to about 25.
right.
So I did, and what you have in the book now is about, I don't know, 25 pages or so of my early years, my legal and judicial career in Vermont, and so forth.
So how did so the process? So as you mentioned before we went on the air that this is a good example of a COVID book. Like you really were able to kind of sit down and start typing away at it while you were during lockdown. But how much of that first draft did you already kind of have written out pre-COVID?
Uh, I had a fair amount of it written out pre-COVID, but it's gone through multiple iterations, as I
Mm,
suppose most books do. I added a lot, I subtracted a lot, I put in a lot of anecdotes, interesting stories. I took out some of the legal stuff. I didn't include all of the cases I dealt with. I had to decide which ones I thought were most interesting for the average person. So it really did go through a lot of different rewrites.
right.
And I also had to decide on the structure. Did I want to do it chronologically, or did I want to deal with some of the more interesting things up front, even though they weren't chronological? And if I did that, would I explain how I got to that at the beginning when it really came at the end chronologically? These are a lot of structural issues I had to grapple with the help of the editorial staff at the publishers, and we basically decided on a chronological uh, sequence of events, and I was most comfortable with that. That's sort of the way I think, and it allowed me to go through early years, what I did before coming to Vermont, then what I did in Vermont chronologically, and so forth, and it seemed to fit.
Mm.
And
And
then
was that one of the advices that like your wife gave you or an editor gave you, or is that something you kind of had that realization on your own?
that was always one of the way I wanted to do it. My wife, who was
Okay.
a superb editor and grammarian. She loves sentence structure and she loves to write and so forth. She had kind of a different take on it, and I tried to adapt her recommendations. And for me, they never really worked out. Uh, so, and I think the publisher was happy with my chronological way to do it, and that's the way it ended up for better or for worse.
Was there any stories in there that you really wanted to tell, but it just couldn't fit?
I have multiple stories that are not in the book, and sometimes I regret that. Sometimes I'm comfortable with it. I wanted it to be sort of a mix of uh, perhaps less serious content on the one hand, and then more serious content on the other. And I tried to put the anecdotes in where they fit. I might I might describe a murder case and then have an anecdote following that that's interesting and maybe funny, and then get back to something that's more serious. And that's the way it came out.
Right. Is there any plans on trying to make a sequel of all the stories that you couldn't fit in?
I thought about it. I'm working hard on this book, and I haven't really spent enough time yet trying to figure out if there's any future in this second career or not. I'm pretty happy with the way the book came out. I'm spending a lot of time trying to promote it. It's an area of publishing that I am totally unfamiliar with. In fact, the whole publishing process was something I was totally unfamiliar with, and that was a real learning curve for me.
Right.
But I'm doing what I can to get word out about the book, doing podcasts, and I really appreciate your taking the time to spend it with me. And book talks, book reviews. That apparently is a big part of this. I've gotten a couple of reviews under my belt, and I've been actually pretty happy with the way that's turned out. I'm a first author. I was a novice at this, and I can now hold the product up and say, I did this, and I think it
Right.
came out pretty well.
Right. So, what would be your advice for that have a book? They write a draft, but they're still kind of hesitant or scared to actually take the plunge.
Yeah, the plunge is really intimidating. Uh, and if I were to give other fledgling authors some advice, I would say get advice and help from people that have been there before.
Mm.
I tried to do a lot of this on my own, and I think if I were doing it again, I would start much earlier, getting advice from people who have been through the mill. Mine is a nonfiction book, so I would look to people who have done nonfiction, perhaps in this particular genre of memoir and something that involves both local content and international content. Uh, and in fact, I did solicit advice from a couple of people who have done the same thing, and that's been healthy. But so getting advice from fellow authors who have run this gamut before would be my strong recommendation. Also, try to get a publisher who understands what you're trying to convey. My book was a nonfiction book, and it involved a lot of content that local people weren't really comfortable with. I had to get an
Mm.
editor in Kosovo at some point during the editing process. But the publishers, at least in my experience, were very helpful. They were, I think, committed to this project. They wanted it to come out right, and they gave me a lot of good advice. Uh, and finding a publisher is not all that easy. In my case, it almost dropped in my lap.
Okay.
Um, I can tell that story. I don't know if you know a man named Bill Mayers, who's a Vermont author who writes a lot of humor.
Yep.
He had developed a relationship with Rootstock Publishing, and Bill and I and our wives were having dinner one time a year and a half ago or so, and I was talking to him about my memoir and the draft of it. He said, "Well, send me a draft. Let me take a look at it, and if I think it might be of interest to Rootstock, I'll forward it to them and try to connect you." And that happened, and we made a good connection fairly early on. And if that hadn't happened, I have no idea how I would have found a publisher. I suppose I would have submitted the manuscript to, I'd go online, find out who publishers are of this type of genre, send a manuscript, expect to be rejected, and it maybe never would have come to fruition. So I was very lucky in being able to make that contact early on in the process. So finding a publisher would be, extremely important part of this process. And do it through networking and outreach, and contact other authors, find out how they found a publisher, what the publisher was interested in terms of the type of book they wanted to work with, and so forth. So there are a lot of steps in the process, and it's intimidating. It was very scary to me. I have a fair amount of self-confidence, so I was willing to plod along until I got where I wanted to be. But you have to be willing to accept rejections and rewrites and negative comments and so forth. It's a difficult process.
Yeah, you gotta have some thick skin on that. Yeah.
Yeah, thick skin is a way to put it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dean. So as we say, your book out, A Judge's Odyssey, is available now in bookstores. Shop local. If you have an opportunity, you can order it from your local bookstore, no matter where you're hearing this from.
Yes.
But as you say, it's from Rootstock Publishing. You can go on their website, rootstockpublishing.com, and they can order the book through there as well.
And just about any bookseller can do the same. I've gone on the websites of many booksellers. Some I've contacted personally and tried to make a connection with them to get them to carry the book. Many of them have done that. But you can go on just about any bookseller, type in the name of the book or type in my name. It comes up on their website, and it's very easy to order the book. And I encourage you to do that. I think you'd have fun reading it.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Dean. And also, you donate 100% of your net profits to the International Domestic Refugee Relief Organizations.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that. That's something I really wanted to make clear. This is not a profit-making operation from my point of view. From fairly early on. Well, I'll tell you why I decided to do this. During the initial Russian invasion of Ukraine, there were tens of thousands of refugees, including a lot of children. And I decided if I ever make any money from this book, I want to donate it to these international relief organizations. A prominent one is Save the Children.
Yeah.
If you go on the Charity Navigator, you find that it's extremely well respected. Another one is the International Red Cross. So yeah, I got motivated as a result of Russia invading Ukraine to donate all of the profits to these types of organizations.
Right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dean, for coming on. And listen, you have to come back on when you write your sequel book. Then.
Okay, I'll do that. And I enjoyed our conversation.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, Barney. Thanks very much. I enjoyed it.